Thank you very much. Hopefully you'll find this worth your while. I know. And I do, I don't know if were any of you here for the last session, the Kyocera session? I'm feeling a bit challenged because the gentleman, he was fantastic, and so I have to try and follow that. So my name's Neil, hello. What am I? I'm a researcher. So I spend my life talking to companies about what they're doing with this kind of technology, what they're finding easy, what they're finding hard, and what they're achieving and what they're not achieving. And I've been doing this for about 15 years, looking at all kinds of automation technology. So I specialize in looking at workflow, BPM, RPA. Increasingly, I would say probably half of my time now is spent looking at RPA specifically, and also some integration technology. So what I'm really going to do, if you've been to any of the existing customer presentations, I suppose more than anything, my job is to try and join some dots. So really, I suppose, looking ahead at what I'm going to present and reflecting on what I've seen from other people, hopefully the sense you'll get from looking at my presentation, hearing me talk, is that fundamentally, if you're already working with Bizagi or you're thinking about it, then you're on the right track. What I'm going to try and do is really join the dots to help make sense of why technology like Bizagi's is so important. So try and place it into the context of digital transformation and industry transformation and make sense for you of a lot of stuff that's happening at the moment. So anyway, I should shut up, stop waffling and get on with the content. Right. Wow. There's some really interesting looking buttons here. Okay. So, so first off, I'm going to start by setting the scene and talk about where we're at and why, hopefully, why you're all here. But I'm going to present it in a way that you might not have seen before. And then I'm going to talk a bit more specifically about the need for platforms, not necessarily Bizagi's, but platforms like Bizagi's, and the real value you get for them, and the value you get from working with them in a particular kind of way. All right, so let's start off by talking about where we are at. And I spend quite a lot of time talking to people about this next chart, which you might think has absolutely no connection at all to BPM. But I promise you it does. And I can't claim to have created these data charts, but I do believe they show something very, very profound. Looking across the room at you guys here and how old you are. So I'm just coming up to 50. I started out a career in computer science as a programmer in the early 90s. All right, so I did computer science at university, went into software engineering, and everything I was told, every bit of my training, it was drummed into me that I could not waste CPU cycles, I could not waste memory, I could not waste disk space. I had to compile as rarely as possible because compiling was really expensive. There's a whole mindset that's kind of drilled into you as someone who was trained any time before like the last 5 years. Fundamentally a world of scarcity, and there's a mindset around scarcity, which you may not know it, but that's very, very deeply ingrained within you if you have that kind of background. It certainly was, until recently, very, very deeply ingrained in me. I would contend that over the last 5 years, that has changed. It's fundamentally flipped. And now to a rough approximation, the stuff that we used to care deeply about not wasting is nearly free. All right? So CPU cycles, bandwidth, memory, disk space, near enough free. You think about what that does to the way your organization works, the way it can use technology, the way your competitors can use technology. For any organization that can get people with the right mindset together, get enough of the right people with the right mindset together, for any organization that can do that and harness this flip, it's mind-blowing, it's colossal. And I think we're still only just realizing how big of a change that actually is. So I talk about really shifting fundamentally from a world of scarcity, which is what's kind of in my DNA still, to a world of abundance, and it creates fundamentally different opportunities and behaviors. And of course, abundance in the underlying technology creates, one thing it creates is competitor abundance. This is a picture, it's actually a little out of date now, it's about 18 months old, and it's a picture of the fintech, so the financial technology landscape in Holland. Right, so this is the landscape of of companies just in Holland. And Holland is not, the Netherlands is not a big market, you know, globally speaking. So if I was to show you something similar for France, Germany, Spain, Italy, US, Canada, Portugal, wherever you're thinking, it's going to be the same, or there's going to be more, all right? So fundamentally, what's happening here, this is about barriers to entry, right? The reason why financial services and other industries are changing so rapidly is fundamentally this chart. It's not just financial services, though. It's also logistics and distribution, retail, insurance, happening everywhere. Now, what do we do about it? The answer, and I've seen this in many places at this event already, the answer is always, and the gentleman from Kyocera was fantastic on this point, the answer is digital transformation, right? That's how we deal with it. If we're an established company, we digitally transform. Hooray! That's what we do, which is fantastic. But what does that actually mean? And this is the first place where companies tend to get stuck. Because what do you actually mean by that? It turns out that there's four main things that people mean when they say this. And different groups of people tend to think of it in different ways. I won't spend a lot of time on this chart, but I'll just go through it quickly. But fundamentally, the research we've done over the last 3 years or so points to four different kind of personas, four different attitudes towards what digital transformation actually means. And it really depends on the kinds of things you care about as a person or as an organization. So let's start top right, because in fact that's kind of, I would say, 65% or so of organizations start in the top right. They really think about, okay, how can we use digital tech to create new opportunities to engage with our customers? Yeah, so it's a customer experience kind of perspective. And that's, I would say, the majority view. There's also the group that kind of goes, oh, actually what we want to do is we want to be the next Uber or the next Airbnb or whatever it is we want to be. So for them, it's all about creating new kinds of products or leveraging new kinds of industry networks, something like that. Now, you can see there's actually axes here. Fundamentally, what separates these different perspectives is the kinds of resources that you care about. So the underlying truth here is that what digital technology is about, it's about the ability to coordinate resources more effectively. All right, when you talk about resources from an economic point of view. And on the right-hand side, we're talking about resources that are primarily not in our business. They're out there in the market. On the left-hand side, you find people who will say, oh, yeah, we want to do digital transformation. And what that means to us is about a social intranet. Yeah, using some kind of social platform internally, like Facebook at work or something like that, or maybe SharePoint on steroids with some mobile access and some extra social features. And that's what we're going to do. And then there's other people that focus very much on the operations. So they might be thinking about mobile devices out in the field. They might be talking about predictive maintenance. They might be talking, if they're really on the edge, they might be talking about IoT or industrial IoT kinds of applications. So different people mean different things when they talk about digital transformation. That's the first thing to think about. But the reason why this is important to you is that I said already that most people, and I would guess that most of your organizations, if you're talking about digital transformation, you're talking about the stuff on the right. Most focus out there is on what I would call the digital outside. But here's the thing. Actually, you can't do that unless you also do that. So, like I say here, a digital outside has to be supported by a digital inside. Why is that? Well, I'll give you, I could talk about this for hours, but I'll just give you one kind of trivial reason why this is true. Imagine that a group in your organization says, okay, we're going to do digital transformation and we're going to create a mobile app. Anybody in financial services, your company has probably built a mobile app. That was the first thing they did, right? Maybe they built 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, because that's a fun thing to do. So we'll start with a mobile app and we'll personalize it and we'll do like a personalized website and we'll A/B test the hell out of it and we'll do some really cool stuff. We'll personalize everything and that'll be amazing. And so they launch a big new digital initiative and there's a social media presence and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to onboarding new customers, it turns out that actually there's a real problem with onboarding customers, or that some of the billing doesn't work properly. And when people phone or try and get in touch to make a complaint or ask about their bill, there's no real way of getting the data out in an effective manner. In that kind of situation, I would argue that what you have done is worse than nothing. You would have been better off not doing the mobile app, better off not doing the website, because fundamentally, the orange box is about making promises to customers and prospects. The green, the blue, particularly, are about fulfilling the promises, right? So if you make promises and you can't keep them, probably shouldn't have done anything in the first place. You have to see the connections here, all right? What does it mean to actually make these connections? This is really where the value of platforms like Bizagi comes in, because, and actually for brevity, I've taken a really, really useful slide out, but I'll kind of try and paint the picture with words briefly. You think about how lots and lots of established organizations, maybe like yours, have spent the last 15 years driving transformation. And we've seen it through the story with, there was a story earlier about, who was it? Oh, it was Manpower in Portugal, talking about huge amounts of consolidation and acquisition. There was also came through with a Kyocera story. We see organizations the world over pursuing strategies that are fundamentally about cost reduction. And the way they do that is by putting resource the place where it costs the least. So you see shared services centers, you see offshore servicing, you see outsourcing, you see more dynamic partner networks and supply chains. It's all about putting resources where they cost the least and then trying to coordinate work across those. The problem is that if you're starting with digital transformation, and most people start with the stuff on the right, fundamentally doing that successfully is about integrating experiences, about giving people an integrated view of what you do. It's about starting outside in and thinking about problems from the customer's point of view. That's all about kind of integration, if you think about it. Not necessarily technical integration, but integration of the experience. That's fundamentally at odds with what most large organizations have been doing for the last 15 years, which has been fundamentally smearing their operations out across the world. So you have, on the one hand, really globally dispersed operations, maybe actually conducted by different organizations that are trying to coordinate what they do, and the need to try and create an integrated experience. You've got these things that they're pulling in completely different directions. What you need to pull those things together is what I call digital threads. You need a way to actually weave together the experience across a very dispersed operation. And that's really, in the current context, why platforms like Bizagi's are so important. So let's talk a bit more about this. Oh, you know what? I'm going to show you the slide anyway. Look, here's the one. I don't know, sorry about that. I thought I'd taken this one out. So here's what I was talking about. If you've got a reasonably well-established organization, you've got a really complex operational model, operational landscape. We spent 15 years going to the left, and now what we need to do is somehow go to the right at the same time. And the only way to do that, it turns out, certainly in my experience, is to try and create a digital thread that takes the customer on a journey through your organization, from the front edge to the back edge, and does it consistently, time and time again, at scale, without dropping the ball. So it's all about how do you share knowledge, how do you coordinate work, how do you make decisions effectively at scale in a distributed organization. And that's really what platforms like Bizagi's are all about. That's what they're good at, actually. Certainly Not when we focus on the modeling piece, but when we focus on the automation piece. So let's kind of dig into this a little bit more and talk about what's involved here. Just checking how I am for timing. Okay. So what does it mean to actually create these digital threads? What are the capabilities you need? Well, there's lots of things, actually, you need to think about, but there's three that really stand out for me. And yeah, I'm trying to explain here what they are in context. So, every established organization's got lots of stuff. Some people call it legacy, some people call it euphemistically heritage systems. I love that, heritage systems. Is it like they should charge you a fee for entry or something like that? So, which I suppose many of them do, really. So you've got all that stuff down here, right? And then you've got another domain at the top. And what you're trying to do is coordinate the work of some automation, some automated tasks, and people. And the people are colored differently because I'm trying to show that they belong to different parts of an organization. So they might be different teams, different departments, different regions. So we're trying to, first off, is one part of the key part of the value comes from the ability to coordinate the work that happens across teams, departments, and maybe even entities. That's number one. That's kind of where most people start. But it's not just about that. And you've heard people all the way from the Bizagi guys through to a lot of the customers also talk about agility. And that's also key, right? Because if we only get to create these digital threads once, but we don't get to recreate them, again, it's a fast-changing world. So the value of having platforms like Bizagi's and other platforms are available. It's important that I tell you that. But platforms like these that are model-driven, they use essentially diagrams and lots of graphical tools to help you build the systems, is that you've got the ability to actually change things more quickly because you don't have to go right down deep into low-level code to make changes. A lot of the time, you can actually make changes in a much faster, more abstract way, right? And key is that making those changes can be done by diverse groups of people, and I'll come back to that in a minute because that's really, really important. The third thing that people often forget, but it's come through on a few of the case studies that you may have already encountered, is that the bit across the top with the two arrows. So the third key component of the value is that you don't just get a platform that enables you to build these, weave these threads, and that allows you to change them easily. For free, you also get insight and instrumentation. And I really struggle to think in all of the years I've been working in technology, it's nearly 30 now, I can't really see any other technology piece where you really get not only an automation benefit, but you also get insight. And not just technical insights. It's not insight about server uptime or throughput or memory usage. It's insight around how well is this working? What's working, what's not working? Where do I need to go next? So it really is fundamentally business performance that I'm able to see. Okay. So somewhat uniquely, there are three key components of the value you get. And they're all really, really important if you're serious about digital transformation. Because it's not just about automation, it's actually also about insight. And I'll go into that a bit more in a sec. So, that all makes sense so far? Yeah? And as I said, I'm probably not explaining anything completely new to you. What I'm trying to do is just join some dots and help to explain why all this is so important right now. So let's talk a bit more about the insight piece. And talk a bit more about what a lot of people get wrong when they talk about digital transformation. So for a very long time, I encountered organizations that when they talked about digital transformation, they talked about the stuff on the left. They talked about a place you go to. So digital as being kind of a destination. Well, you know what, if we just adopt the cloud, then that's done. And we've done digital transformation, right? Put all our apps on the cloud, everything's cool. Or you'll find others that talk about mobile. And they'll say, oh, well, when we've got mobile apps, then we're done. That's it, we've done digital. And the problem is that this is an ever-changing landscape, right? So 3 years ago, it was all about SaaS and infrastructure as a service. Now it's more about platform as a service. 3 years ago, it was about mobile and social. Now, more and more people are talking about AI and IoT. And next year, people will be talking about augmented and virtual reality, if they're not already. So whatever is on the left is going to keep changing. There's going to be different value in those things for you as there is for your neighbor. Okay? So the problem is choosing a destination is you're never actually going to get to that end point. The far more useful way of thinking about what you're doing with digital transformation is not to think of it as a destination, but think of it as building a vehicle for your organization. Okay? Fundamentally, a platform, and I don't mean necessarily a technical platform, I mean a set of capabilities for your organization that allow you to change in a different way than you were ever able to change before. And that's what the right-hand side is about. And it's a bit of a cartoon because there's many more moving parts in the real world, but fundamentally, the kind of platform that we're talking about here has these two key parts. And we've already talked a little bit about them, but it's crucial that when you think about what it means to digitally transform, you think about these two parts working together in tandem. So the top right is about the ability through automation, through model-driven capabilities and so on. It's the ability to have that agility. So you can change, you can build, you can change services, processes, and even business models. But the other piece is that you also need something that gives you insight. And then you need the ability to actually tie them together. So you end up with a virtuous cycle. Okay? So you end up with platforms and applications that drive results more quickly in a more flexible way, but they also give you instrumentation so that you can see what's working well, what's not working well, what people like, what they don't like. And all we have to do is look at, and I know it's kind of, it's a real stereotype and it's a bit cliched now to talk about somebody like Netflix. But just think about what it is that makes Netflix so compelling, and it is fundamentally that on the right-hand side. It's fundamentally that their business completely revolves around an end-to-end delivery platform for content that can change on a dime, can change every day. And in fact, it does change every day, whether you know it or not. What those guys release changes every day. But fundamentally, it's also data-driven. That platform also kicks out loads of digital exhaust. It doesn't go to waste. It's all mined and it's used to drive improvements, not only in the recommendations that are made to you as users, but also to the platform and the way it works internally as well, right? So when you think about digital natives, and Netflix is just one example, it's easy to call up because actually they're very open about what they do. The value that they create comes from this virtuous cycle, all right? That's what you guys need to be doing, and that's what platforms like Bizagi can help you do. So, I just explained. Insights are key. We can't forget that, right? So always, always, always think about the value you get from the platform. It's not just being about the automation, it's also about the insight. But there's more we need to think about in the last 5 minutes of what we have. And it's really about the experience of using a platform and what you should really aim for in the experience of using a platform like Bizagi's or one of the others that exist out there. And from research and consulting work we've done over the last 3-4 years, I'd say there's a couple of things that come out quite strongly. When we look at how people use these platforms, there are 3 distinct kinds of ways that people use these platforms. And I'm going to go through them briefly now. So the first is, we find that organizations want to use platforms like these to rapidly prototype, okay? Because we can build things very, very quickly. They may not give us all the functionality we ultimately want, but we can build an MVP, a minimum viable product, in maybe you know, 1 sprint or less in just a few days. Right, so that's the first thing we commonly see is people using these platforms to do prototyping rapidly, kind of with a designer or developer working kind of in the face of a user, working side by side, very rapidly, very iteratively. The second kind of use case is what you might call departmental app dev. So it's relatively constrained in its scope and it's tightly bounded, and we know exactly what problem we're trying to solve. And it's probably just for a relatively small part of the organization, and it solves a problem that we have right now. And what we typically find is there's some kind of, I'm oversimplifying, but there's some kind of mix of business analysts, maybe a bit of a technical development resource, working with a blend of users. And the other thing I'm showing here is that this box is kind of dotted because we're not necessarily building something final, we're building something to test and see, does it work, does it fly, is it interesting? Ultimately, we may throw this away because it's not interesting. Here we're actually building something that we know we really need. Okay, so it's a slightly different kind of use case. And the last one, the last way that we see people using platforms like this is to extend some kind of core process. So, you know, I'm trying to represent here. So there's a whole load of other resources and sort of systems of record out here. And what we're trying to do is create a more agile kind of front end, or I don't mean necessarily just UX, but actually a more agile kind of wrapper around some of those legacy systems. We commonly find people using things like Bizagi to, for example, take existing SAP systems, which are horrible, nobody likes, hugely expensive, people avoid as far as they can, to put some kind of wrapper around that so it actually makes much more sense to people carrying out a day-to-day job. Okay? So this is another thing we commonly find, where, you know, a lot of this stuff exists already, we're not going to throw it away, but what we're trying to do is create a new layer around the edge of it. Now, the key here is that actually they're all related. They all kind of feed into each other. All right? So even if you think you are using a platform for one use case, the chances are over time you're going to be using it for the others as well. So let's say, for example, you're starting out using something like Bizagi and you're thinking, oh yeah, we're just doing prototyping. Well, that's fine, but you know what? If you find something that works, and I've seen people do this, I've seen organizations, they have innovation teams, they use, actually I haven't seen anybody doing this with Bizagi, but I have seen people do it with other platforms. They'll use a low-code app dev platform, they'll create a prototype, and then they'll say, fantastic, we've validated this, we know what we want to do, and then they throw it away, and they create the actual kind of the real app in something else, which is, to me is just insane. But there you go. You know, there are tools, and Bizagi's tools are an example where you can actually work across all these different use cases. So it's really, really important to think about these different kinds of use cases. The other thing to call out about this is that these are all slightly different, right? You do them in different contexts, you do them with different kinds of business backing, you do them over different time scales. So I'm just checking how I'm doing for time. But they all share something really, really important, is that they all have little arrows, circular arrows between the developers and the users. None of them work unless you have agile collaboration between people who are going to end up using this and the people who are building it. So what I'm going to leave you with is this message. If you're serious about digital transformation, you cannot do that without a platform like Bizagi's, because that's fundamentally about connecting a digital inside to a digital outside. If you're thinking about one of these platforms, you have to find a way to collaborate and work in an agile fashion. Okay, in fact, you've seen this across, I think, every case study we've heard on these stages over the last few hours. Everybody talks about agile working. Everybody talks about iteration. Everyone talks about collaboration. Wherever people don't do that, it's always bad news. So use what the tools give you, right? Use the model-driven graphical tools that you have. Use them to sit down with people who are going to be affected by this and work side by side with them. How am I doing for time? Was that okay?
We've probably got a couple of minutes for questions. Would you like to take some? Does anybody have any questions for Neil?
Nope.
Fantastic. You've explained it all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you.